Good evening, brothers and sisters in the Dharma. Thank you so much. Such a fantastic turnout. I didn't expect this. When I saw the rain around 7 o'clock, I say, uh-oh. So happy to see so many of you. Today we're going to talk about Paticca Samuppada and a summary of it. So parts of it I will go a little bit fast. So let me finish it. You write down any question you have so that at the end of it you can ask the question and then we'll catch up on whatever that you need to clarify. Now when we take a look at Bhante Punnaji's teachings, there are a few areas where they are fundamentally different from almost all other teachers. I will highlight them for you, the most fundamental differences. The first and foremost, which actually has helped a lot of us, is the fact that Bhante has taken the trouble to discern and differentiate what is mano, what is chitta, what is vijnana. That all these three are three different aspects of the mental activity we call mind. And Bhante has differentiated it, discerned it, and explained to us. And also Bhante went on to talk about how these three aspects of the mind correlate with the activity of the brain. In a nutshell, Bhante has summarized that without the brain and the body, there is no mind. The mind doesn't exist. The mind is simply the result of activities in the body, specifically or especially the central nervous system, where it is connected to the various parts of the body. And that gives rise, this activity in the body gives rise to what we call mind. And there are three aspects of the mind that we need to understand and differentiate. But all the other teachers don't differentiate them. When they come across the word mano in the Pali Kenyan or the word chitta, they call both of them mind. They are not wrong. It's just that they didn't differentiate it, they didn't discern that there is a difference. And the second very important difference, fundamental difference, is the way Bhante has explained the five aggregates. Pancha Upadana Kanda, what he calls the five constituents of the process of perception. So we're going to touch on this very little today, just touch on it. Very importantly, how Bhante differentiated also the explanation of Sanya, Vedana, and Sankhara, and Vijnana, and also Nama, Rupa. Very importantly, because Nama, Rupa was translated in a very existential way. Nama is mentality, Rupa is physical objects. That's what most people translate as. Right? And that is fundamentally incorrect. And the third area where Bhante's teachings are substantially different, fundamentally different, is in fact what we're going to cover today, Paticca Samuppada. What Bhante calls the antecedental concurrence, or the concurrence of antecedents. What is important is that when we read sutras, when we hear Dhamma speakers, we must maintain a mindset centered around experiential thinking. Because the Buddha's teaching is always, and I repeat, always experiential thinking, because it is experiential, it's experiences that the Buddha was teaching. The Buddha was not teaching some kind of existence, and in fact the opposite of this. Buddha was trying to alert us that thinking of existence leads to rebirth, and that's what I'm going to summarize at the end of today, that our mindset thinking of existence will lead us to be reborn over and over and over again. This is the important thing. If we can free our mind from this existential thinking and observe everything happening as an activity, then we understand anicca. And then we understand why we're experiencing dukkha. And then we fully understand that there is no eternal soul that we have to contend with. In fact, the word soul also is controversial, okay? I'm not saying that there is no soul, because the word soul can be used to define different aspects of what's going on. Some people use the word soul to define this consciousness. Now, if that is the meaning of the word soul, then yes, of course, there is consciousness. There is soul, but the only difference is the soul is not existential. It doesn't exist. It's an experience. Experiential. So if you say that this consciousness, experience of consciousness, arises when we are born and extinguishes when we die, then you can call it a soul, fine. But it is not an eternal soul. It doesn't exist. It does not remain forever. Right? Unlike many other religions that teach about the eternal soul, that when you die, the soul will ascend to heaven if you have been good and you believe in them. And if you don't believe in them, then it descends down to hell. So I'm just wondering, there's a lot of questions around that. Why ascend? Why descend? Is heaven up there? Can't it be down there? That's also another interesting thing to point out. So it's important not to care about existentialism, but to focus our mind every time we hear the Dharma, try and relate it to experiential. And it's only through this relating it to experiential that we can truly and fully comprehend anicca. Anicca is not a static concept. It's just about the fact that everything arises dependent on the presence of necessary conditions. And when these conditions change, then whatever arises fades away. And that is anicca. And that is experiential. That is the key to understanding Bhante Punnaji's teachings. So let's get to the beginning. I'm going to start and go very fast. Bhante has always taught us, if we were to look at what's going on around us, who are we? The first thing we should say is, we are organisms in an environment. That means there is this body that is alive, and the activity in this body is what we are experiencing. And there are two major activities going on, two fundamental activity going on in this body. The first thing is called metabolism. Metabolism is this process that keeps this body alive. When metabolism stops, the body dies. In a dead body, there is no metabolism. In a living body, metabolism is ongoing. And metabolism is the continuous process of anicca, rising and falling, and causing the cells to divide. And some people say multiply. When cells divide, one cell becomes two, two cells become four. So in a way, you can also say the number of cells multiply. So it is the whole process of cells in the body dividing. And because of this whole process, it keeps us alive. Strong cells survive, weak cells die off. If the majority of our cells are weak, then we have a weak body. If majority of our cells are strong, we have a strong body. That's simple as that. And as we age, the majority of our cells get weaker and weaker. So this is really this process of metabolism going on. The second thing going on is because we have 5 sense organs, and they are sensing activities in the environment. And it is this sensing of activities in the environment brought to the brain that we become aware of something happening. So the whole environment is going on, and we are simply organisms in an environment, and there is metabolism going on to keep this body alive, and there are 5 sense organs sensing activities in the environment. And how do these 5 sense organs sense activities in the environment? Because in the body there is the central nervous system. The central nervous system is made of 2 main parts. The first is the brain, and then the spinal cord. The spinal cord is connected to the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is connected to all the sense organs. So activities in the environment will stimulate the sense organs. The sense organs will send signals through through the spinal cord and brought to the brain. And then the brain will begin to react. So the brain reacts depending on a number of factors, right? So what happens is that every sense organ has a set of nerves going to the brain. The eyes will have optic nerves going to the brain, the ear will have auditory nerves, and the nose will have these olfactory nerves, and the tongue will have these gustatory nerves. Actually, they are called, well, it's a long word. To keep it short, I just call it gustatory nerves. And of course, our body, the skin, under the skin, we have these touch-sensitive receptors, which is somatosensory nerves going to the brain. They carry impulses to the brain depending on the stimulation from the environment. So light entering the eyeball, there is light-sensitive cells at the back of the eyeball, the retina, and they react to the light. So in other words, as soon as activities in the environment stimulate the senses, the sense organ react, and that reaction causes impulses going to the brain. And this is the reaction Bhante Punnaji has always been talking about, that there is a reaction, and this is first the sensory reaction, carrying signals to the brain, and then the brain processes it. The brain is made of three major parts, evolved over millions of years. In the most primitive part is the brainstem that keeps the body alive. Then there is this limbic system, which is commonly called the emotional brain, that is responsible for triggering biochemical reactions in the body, and that is really the beginning of what we call emotions. Right? Emotion actually begins with changes in the body, and then it affects the mind. And then, of course, we have the cerebral cortex, the thinking brain, which is what is also called the learning brain. Right? These three parts of the brain, in a way, maybe not in 100%, but in a way correlates with activities that we describe as called the mind. And the Buddha spoke of the mind making of three parts. Vijnana is the ability to perceive stimulations from the environment, becoming aware of objects. Chitta is the emotional brain that reacts to the feelings, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. And Mano is the thinking brain, a thinking part of the mind, which basically interprets what has been perceived. And they correlate with what's going on in the brain. Sensory perception, vijnana, this comes through the brain stem, brought into the brain. And it passes through the limbic system first, especially one part of the limbic system called the amygdala. The information from the environment passes through the amygdala first before it reaches the thinking brain. And the amygdala is found inside the limbic system. And this whole activity in the limbic system more or less correlates to affective process, chitta. And this information is then subsequently brought to the thinking part of the brain, the cerebral cortex, and that corresponds to the cognitive process in the mind, which is mano in Pali. So there are three aspects of mind, mental activity, as a result of the way the brain has evolved. So there is vijnana, chitta, and mano. So the Buddha described these three activities, and these are three activities of mental experience. We can only experience it. We cannot hold it, touch it, see it. It is not something you can hold on to, but you can experience these activities. So vijnana is the process of perception whereby our sense organs are being stimulated, and then we become aware that we have perceived some objects. Mano is the cognitive process that interprets what was perceived. Categorized interpretation. That means we interpret things based on categorization. And categorized interpretation giving meaning to what was perceived. And whatever was perceived arises in the mind in the form of a mental image. If it is coming through the eyes, then you have a visual image. If it is coming through the ears, then you have an auditory image, the image of a sound. Right? If it is coming to your touch receptors, then you have a mental image of touches. Right? So therefore, this mental image is called rupa, arising. And the mano interprets each of this mental arising by giving it a label. So when you see this, your eyes have seen this object. What is this object? Mouse. All of you would have seen this for the first time, because this is a brand new mouse I just bought the other day. It's the first time I'm using it. So now you've seen it for the first time. But how do you know it's a mouse? Because you have seen hundreds of mouse before. And by looking at this object that looks like the hundreds of mouse you've seen before, you are now able to give it a name, a label. Because of the category it belongs to, it looks like all the mouse you've seen before. So that's how we interpret anything, by categorization. So we call this a mouse. The word mouse is the nama. The mental image you have in your mind, that mental image of seeing this, that is the rupa. So when you see, when light enters the eye, reflected from the mouse, entering your eye, you now have a mental image of that mouse I'm holding. And that is the rupa you're having. And then you call this a mouse, and that is the nama you gave it. So what is rupa? Rupa is the mental image. But unfortunately, a lot of translators say this object is the rupa. Now, common sense also dictates. And somehow, there are some people who don't have common sense. People, I'm not referring to any race, but people who come from South India, where their own mother tongue, the word rupa means image, and yet, because of what was translated by the Westerners, the Orang Putih who didn't understand Pali in the first place, they call rupa object. And some of these people from South India, including some monks, even say, oh yeah, rupa is object. How can that be? Bahasa Malaysia also has its roots coming from Sanskrit. What's the meaning of the word rupa in Bahasa Malaysia? Image, appearance. It's not object. Rupa never meant object. It meant appearance arising in the mind, the mental image arising in the mind. So it's very important to remember this. This is the fundamental distinction that Bhante Punnaji has made very clearly. And this is where a lot of people has misunderstood it by calling the object rupa, right? And calling our mentality the nama. Nama is mentality, rupa is corporeality or materiality. Corporeality, that's a wonderful name. When I came across that, I had to check out the dictionary. Right? So they say rupa is corporeality, materiality, matter, object, all wrong. It's mental image of what was perceived through the sense organs. And then chitta reacts. Every time you see something, it triggers some kind of a feeling inside you, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. And that feeling triggers an emotional reaction. So, chitta is the part of the mind that reacts, and that emotional reaction is tanha. And this is again another important distinction. Bhante points out, tanha is emotional reaction, not just craving. Craving is just a part of it. Tanha can also mean when you see something unpleasant, something you don't like, something that hurts you, something which displeases you, and then you get upset about it. Now that's not craving. You get upset about something, how can that be craving? So tanha is really emotional reaction, and there are three types of emotional reaction. If it is something pleasant, you like it. So there is a lobha towards it. That means it is a lust or greed towards something pleasant. If it is unpleasant, you don't like it. That is a dosa towards it. Right? And if it is whatever that you sense, you begin to realize or begin to have this notion that there is someone experiencing it. There is this self experiencing it. Moha is the delusion of a self-centered existence, where you think that there is a self experiencing everything. And in Paticca Samuppada, we're going to take a look at how this self comes to be. And of course, we begin to personalize every experience. Upadana. So all these concepts we're going to look at in Paticca Samuppada, because they are explained in Paticca Samuppada in a greater details. When we talk about vijnana, we're talking about perceiving. This is the activity of perceiving. That means we're experiencing something through the sense organs. That's all there is. Vijnana is the experience coming from the sense organ. We become aware of objects. Right? because the mind has reacted, the sense organs have reacted, the mind has reacted, now the mental image arises, we become aware. With the arising of the mental image, Mano begins to interpret it. So Mano actually has two processes going on, or rather two things happening. First, it is interpreting it, cognizing it. So cognizing is the activity of becoming, knowing what has been perceived. That's why there is this word recognition, recognition. Recognition, pronounced in a conventional way, recognition. Recognize, in the conventional way, you pronounce it as recognize. You recognize something because your mind has recognized something. Not only do you recognize something, we heard from Bhante Punnaji the other day about papancha, we also create stories behind it, and that is called conception. So Mano is responsible for two things. Cognition, that means becoming aware of what has been perceived, and then conception, creating stories behind it, giving more meaning, more stories, right? Adding on to it, adding salt, adding pepper. They call it ka yim ka cho. So when you see this, some of you will be saying, I don't like a black mouse. Now, I don't like a black mouse. You have just added something to what you saw. What did you see? All you saw was a mouse. What happened in your brain? Inside your mind, you start to think, I don't like this black mouse. Or some of you say, wow, that looks exactly like the one I have at home, you know. You see, you have added some story behind it. Some salt and pepper added to it. And then comes the chitta, which reacts to whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. And basically this reaction is called tanha. And then not only does it react to the feeling of pleasant or unpleasant, you also react by clinging on to that experience and say, I see this mouse. Because when I hold this up, most of you in your mind that arises is, I see the mouse. So there's this I arising. Every time we experience something, automatically the mind says, I see this, I feel that, I like this, I don't like that. I, me, or mine is always popping up. That is the part where we are personalizing every experience. And this is really the affection. So the first thing that happens with chitta is this affection. Something you like, something you don't like. If it is pleasant, you like it. If it is unpleasant, you don't like it. And at the same time, it causes you to react. You have an urge, an emotional urge. So these are all experiential. You have an urge to do something. So this is really what chitta is all about. So we're going to take a look at how they come into play in the Paticca Samuppada. Okay, so now that we have settled some basic fundamental teachings that Bhante Punnaji has been telling us all this while, I'm not going to go and repeat all that in details. We're going to move straight into it. Bhante has pointed out that there are two ways an arahant can become enlightened. Most people will become enlightened. Most arahants become enlightened through the first way, awakening through insight. Panya Vimutti. It is one who follows the Eightfold Way, the supernormal Eightfold Way, and then abandoning the five hindrances, and then experiencing the four jhanas, and then from the fourth jhana going on to becoming aware of the realities of life, vidassana, and become emancipated by awakening through this insight. So this is one way, awakening through insight or wisdom. Awakening through insight. The other way is to awaken, is a double awakening. Both insight as well as being able to stop the mind. I'm not going to go into details about this because I've already talked about this in the earlier few reviews. We'll just quickly run through it. The reason why I'm showing you these two ways is to highlight to you what Bhante has always been teaching me. He doesn't really say it very much in public, but I think you may have heard it, how the Buddha himself became awakened through the second way, double awakening. one who abandons the 5 hindrances goes through the 4 ecstasies or 4 jhanas, and then through the 4 imageless realms. That means the mind enters into the arupa samadhis. They are called ayatanas. They are often misunderstood and referred to as the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th jhana. These are not jhanas. These are ayatanas. You can look at the Pali word. They are not called jhanas. They are called ayatanas. So this process is the arupa samadhi, the imageless samadhis, and until it reaches beyond there and the mind stops. And this is what a lot of people call the 9th jhana. Well, how can you call it a jhana when the mind has stopped? There is no mind, zero, zilch. So the mind has stopped, but a lot of people who don't understand this, they call that the 9th jhana, like as though it is another state of mind. It is not. The mind has stopped. So that is Vedayita Nirodha, like Sanna Vedayita Nirodha, where the mind has stopped completely, absolutely stopped the mind. And then, after stopping it, the mind can only stay stopped for 7 days, according to a lot of commentaries, and Bhante has explained it too. 7 days is the maximum it can stay stopped, in order for that person to then awaken from that. And when a person awakens from that, that person has become the Buddha. That person has become enlightened. So the waking up from there, then the person begins to observe, actually observing, experiencing, and seeing the whole process of Paticca Samuppada unfolding in the mind as the mind begins to build up. And that's what we're going to take a look at. Paticca Samuppada, the Buddha experienced this when he became enlightened. He meditated under the Bodhi Tree, went through the 4 jhanas, and then went through the ayatanas, what a lot of people call jhana number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, which actually it is ayatanas, not jhanas. So then the Buddha's mind reached a state where it stopped. That is Sanna Vedayita Nirodha. And then after a while, the mind awakens. How long that was, nobody knows. It was not mentioned how long that mind stopped, but maximum 7 days. Beyond 7 days, I don't know what happens. I have not tried it. Maybe I'll let you know when I try that. Okay, so basically the Buddha awakened from that stopping of the mind and then saw the unfolding of the Paticca Samuppada. But this is the long way, the hard way to awaken. And the Buddha knew that it's not easy for people to do this. But he found the shortcut. And he made it, and the shortcut is the Pañña-vimutti. And that's where he then taught the Eightfold Way. Learning and practicing the Eightfold Way is really the shortcut that the Buddha is teaching us. He has drawn up a map, like Bhante Punnaji has always described. A discoverer entered a country for the first time, and he walks around the country, roams around the country which has not been inhabited, and then he starts to make up the map. Where is the river? Where is this path leading? And where is that path leading? And where is this and where is that? And then with that map, the next person who comes along just takes a look at the map and can find his way around very quickly. And this is exactly what the Buddha did. He had found the way to awakening, the hard way. Now, he made the easy way called the Eightfold Way for us to follow, a roadmap. So this is really the way the Buddha became awakened, by completely stopping the mind and then awakening from it. He observed the happening of Paticca Samuppada, the concurrence of logical antecedents. So in a nutshell, graphically, there are 2 ways to become enlightened. After the 4th jhana, then practicing the Satta Bhujanga. This is really the way the Buddha has taught how to attain this, experiences vipassana. And that is through the practice of Satta Bhujanga, to bring the mind to a state of equanimity, as they call it, upekkha. And this is really the Pañña-vimutti process. awakening from the dream of existence through Panya Vimutti. Vimutti means liberation, emancipation. Panya Vimutti. Panya means wisdom or insight. Liberation through insight. The other way, the long way, is that after the fourth jhana, then the mind goes through the ayatanas, which is a gradual process of stopping the mind, step by step. Now, in the four jhanas, the emotional mind, the chitta, has already stopped. The chitta is no longer fighting with the mano, because chitta and mano are always fighting in our conventional world. Our thinking mind and our emotional mind are always having a go at each other, constantly. And as we enter the jhanas, the two minds become one. And basically, the two minds are no longer fighting with each other. And they call this process unification. The Pali word is ekagata. And some people call it one-pointedness. But what it really means, the word ekagata, is not one-pointedness. Right? Not concentration. Ekagata means moving in one direction. So the two minds are now working together as one. That's really what ekagata means. Two minds working together as one. So the emotional mind is no longer active. So the two minds have become one. The next stage in the ayatanas is then to bring this mind to a state of stopping. Complete 100% stillness. Totally stopping that mind. So when it finally reached that stage, right, so it will then liberate you from all your suffering. And when the mind is completely stopped, that state is called Sanna Vedayita Nirodha, stopping of the mind. This is not the ninth jhana as what other people call. The mind is no more. The mind has stopped. You can't call it a jhana anymore. It's not a state of mind anymore. So that is what has happened. And then when the mind awakens from it, it emerges from that stopping stage and start to build. The mind begins to construct. The first major activity going on is sankhara. The mind begins to construct. And then you awaken. As the mind awakens, you can then observe the whole process of Paticca Samuppada unfolding. And that's what we're going to look at today. So this double awakening, there's a long Pali word there, I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but this is double awakening. Right? You can find this explained in the Level 3 book on page 54, the new edition. Right? Later on, I'll give you the link to download all my PowerPoint slides, so you don't have to try to redraw this picture, but you can take down the notes if you want to. And basically what happens is, the Buddha meditated, and in our conventional world, we are in this condition called karma bhava. Here, this word karma does not mean your action karma. No, this is karma. The A is pronounced long and the M is pronounced short, karma. Whereas the action karma, the M is pronounced longer, the A is pronounced short, karma. Alright? This is karma. Karma here means sensual. Sensual means you have sense organs. Your sense organs are active. So we are in a conventional world where we rely on sense organs. That's why it's called karma bhava. And this is affecting us. It is our 5 sense organs that is actually causing us a lot of suffering, because we cling on to that experience. Pancha upadana kanda. The pancha kanda is the 5 aggregates, the process of perception, where we perceive the environment, but we cling on to it. The upadana comes in. Right? And basically, in this state, we got to develop this process that leads us to the jhanas. And there are 5 constituents in the jhanas. So the first thing we're going to learn is to eliminate the 5 hindrances, abandoning the 5 hindrances. You can abandon it on a temporary basis, which allows you to experience first jhana. And if you are able to take it deeper, you may experience a second jhana. But you really have to eliminate the 5 hindrances before you are able to go on to reach the 4th jhana. Right? So you can suspend it, abandon it on a temporary basis, and you will experience jhanas. Right? It's not an easy thing to do, but it is doable. To abandon the 5 hindrances on a temporary basis is quite doable. You just have to pay attention to it, and when you practice your meditation, be diligent. And you are able to abandon it, you will experience the jhanas. At least the first and maybe the second. And then after the 4th jhana, right, the Buddha went on to after abandoning the 5 hindrances, the Buddha went on to experience the jhanas. So there are 4 jhanas to be experienced. And the Pali terms of the jhanas are there. And you can see in the Pali term, these are jhanas, right? Patama jhana, the 1st jhana. Dutiya jhana, the 2nd jhana. Tatiya jhana, the 3rd jhana. Chatutta jhana, the 4th jhana. The Pali word says jhana. So these are jhanas. Now, having reached the 4th jhana, then the Buddha went on into the arupa samadhi, the arupa realm, the arupa bhava. Because in the jhana, there is no more sense organs involved. In the jhana, the rupa bhava, in the jhanas, you are in the rupa bhava. There is only mental images. There is no sensual activity going on anymore. Because you have abandoned the 5 hindrances. When you've abandoned the 5 hindrances, you're no longer allowing your sense organs to disturb you anymore. And therefore, you are in the jhanas. In the jhanas, you're no longer working with your 5 sense organs. So you're not in the sensual realm, you are in the rupa realm. There are only mental activities going on. Mental images. In the beginning, the mental images are very vivid, very clear. And that is vitakka vichara. But gradually, the vitakka vichara subsides and disappears as you enter the 2nd jhana. Right? So these mental images begin to fade away. And when the mental images have faded away, you now enter into the arupa bhava. And in arupa bhava, then you're experiencing ayatanas. As you can see in the Pali word there, realm of infinite space. It's an ayatana. The Pali word is very clear. Ayatana, not jhana. Realm of infinite perception, realm of nothingness, realm of neither sensation nor no sensation. Bhante has explained this thoroughly. I must say I am not able to explain it with the same level of elaboration, so I will not attempt. Right? But basically these are ayatanas, where the mind starts to slow down and stop. The mental activity starts to stop. Step by step, it begins to stop. So when it enters the infinite space, there are no more images. There is just empty space, right? And then it enters into infinite perception. Now even the space is no longer there, and then there is just only this process of perception going on. And then nothingness. It reaches a state where there is nothing, right? It's hard for you to imagine what it's like, because this is not the normal state all of us will ever have a chance to experience, unless you become a very, very deep meditator, right? And finally it reaches a state where neither sensation nor no sensation, because the sensation is so subtle that you can no longer become aware of the sensation. Therefore, you can't say there is no sensation, but you can't say there is sensation. And finally, the Buddha meditated to the state where the mind has completely stopped. And that is the absolute stopping of the mind, and that is Sanna Vedayita Nirodha. Cessation of sensation and feeling. Sanya and Vedana are completely stopped. There is no Panchakanda going on anymore. So this is the state of the mind that the Buddha has meditated until it had stopped. It can only stay there for 7 days. And the Panchakanda is made of those 5 constituents of the process of perception. Vedana is feeling, Sanya is sensation. The two always go together. A lot of people translate the word sanya as perception. And they translate the word Vedana as sensation. Well, Sanya is really sensing something. Let's take the sense of touch. I hit my hand. The moment I hit my hand, I can sense the hitting. So I'm sensing the Sanya, the hitting. But at the same time, when I hit the hand, sensing the hitting, I'm also sensing whether there is a pain or no pain. That hitting produces a pain. I'm sensing the feeling. So when I strike my hand, I'm sensing the sensation of the hand being struck. That is Sanya. At the same time, the feeling that this is unpleasant. There is an unpleasant feeling going on there. So Sanya, Vedana go together. You cannot have Sanya without Vedana. You cannot have Vedana without Sanya. You cannot feel something if you didn't sense it. But the moment you sense something, there's a feeling associated with it. So the two always go together. And then with that, it is brought to the mind, and the mind processes it and constructs it. That mental construction takes place and produces a big picture, vijnana, the perception. Oh, I've touched something, or somebody struck my hand. I feel the hand being struck. That is the vijnana. Feeling the hand being struck. You now have that perception of your hand being struck by something. That is vijnana. And then you have a mental image of, oh, there is something that has just struck my hand. My hand just come into contact with something. So the mental image arises, rupa. Right? The same with seeing. The moment light enters the eyeball, the light stimulates the light-sensitive cells at the back of the retina. And these light-sensitive cells, the moment it is stimulated, it sends an impulse to the brain. That impulse is Sanya. But along with that impulse, there is also the feeling whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. Bright light, for example, is unpleasant. Dim light is more pleasant. So the pleasantness comes from, in this case, brightness or dimness. But then at the same time, red light can be unpleasant. Blue or green light can be more pleasant. And then you have pleasantness coming from colors, right? So the Vedana can be coming from the brightness or the different frequency, different colors. So all these are brought to the mind, right? So when the Buddha meditated to a state where the mind is completely stopped, something triggered the waking up. And that triggering of the waking up is the Sanya and the Vedana. Because that has to start. Something has to start. And that starting is what woke the Buddha in his state where the mind has stopped. Right? And when the mind has stopped, Bhante calls that state insentience. Now, the word insentience, right? Insentience, if you look at the regular conventional English dictionary, it doesn't give you a good meaning. It just says absence of feeling. But actually, insentience, if you look up the philosopher's dictionary, so in other words, what Bhante did was he went to the dictionary of philosophy. And there, the word insentience meant absence of sensation and feeling. Very precise, amazing that Bhante found the word. Insentience in philosopher's dictionary means absence of sensation and feeling. That's what it is. Cessation of sensation and feeling. Insentience. And this is the state of avijja. And Bhante calls it insentience. Here, avijja simply means not knowing. A lot of people translate the word avijja as ignorance. Now think about it. Ignorance. What is ignorance? Let's put this aside now and think about the word ignorance. What is ignorance? You can only ignore something if you are aware of it. You know it is there, you don't want to accept it, you ignore it. You see somebody you don't like, you just pretend you didn't see. You see? You've seen somebody you don't like, you pretend you didn't see. That's ignoring that person. In the same way, you learn something you don't want to accept, you ignore it. So that is ignorance. How can there be ignorance when the mind has stopped completely? You see? Simple question. So in other words, the stopping of the mind is not ignorance. The mind that has stopped completely is insentience. And that's why Bhante translates this word avijja as insentience.
So two things are present. In the dead body, the temperature goes away and the metabolism stops. But in this body, the temperature remains and the metabolism remains. But there is no thinking or consciousness. That state is what I call avijja. The Pali word avijja comes from the root vid. Vid is simply sensation. With Vedana, the word Vedana is also coming from the same root. Vedana is the sensation. And Vijja means the presence of Vedana. But in this particular state, the Vedana has stopped. The sensation has stopped. And therefore it is the absence of Vedana. So I was trying to find a good English word to translate this state. And that is the word insentience. Insentience. The absence of sensitivity. It's called insentience. How the Buddha or the Prince Siddhartha didn't stop, remain in that state for a long time. After some time, he automatically woke up again. And as he woke up, what happened? He began to see how this process of perception creates the world that we are aware of, and ultimately creates also the self that we are aware of. In other words, the objective experience and the subjective experience is created by this process of perception. And with that comes all the sufferings in the world. A detailed description of that is what is called the Paticca Samuppada. It is only by fully understanding this, by becoming aware of it, that you awaken from the dream of existence.
So in that state of avijja, insentience, something triggered the Panchakanda, and Sanya Vedana started. And with the starting of the Sanya Vedana, Sankhara comes in. It begins to construct. So something triggered the waking up. When the mind had stopped, when the Buddha meditated, the state where the mind had stopped, something triggered the waking up process. And that started the mind to construct. So let's listen to what Bhante has to say about this. Awakening from insentience by stimulation of the Sanya and the Vedana, and the process of Sankhara is started.
Now from that state, again he woke up from that state. And when he woke up from that state, he began to understand how the mind begins to work. So from a state of no mind, he started the first activity of the mind was what is called feeling and sensation. Feeling and sensation. Sensation means, to understand what sensation is, it is important to understand that we said we have eyes, and when light falls on the eye, we begin to see. What do we see? What we see is only light, because the eye can see the light only because this, what we call light, comes in the form of waves, and these waves come in different frequencies. So it's very difficult to explain this if you don't know the meaning of a frequency. So for that, if you know a little about science, you will begin to understand that the frequency means it is simply a kind of shaking. And so this, the light comes in different frequencies, and therefore you begin to see different colors. And this seeing color is what we see. And at the same time, we begin to see this color either as pleasant or it can be unpleasant. Some colors look beautiful, some colors look ugly. So that is what we call feeling. So the sensation is the color, and the feeling is whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. So that is the first thing that we see.
The waking up process began with Sanya Vedana. Sankara then starts to construct. And this is the mental construction of sensory entities being visualized, either by the eye, or heard by the ear, or felt by the skin, and so on. And then we become aware of something. That awareness is vijnana, the awareness of what was perceived through the sense organ. And this is the perception of constructed object. Constructed object, it is constructing that object in your mind and producing the rupa, right? So that construction process builds up the awareness, and then the rupa arises, and then you begin to give it a name. So this is the constructed entity is the rupa, the image arises, and categorized identity of the object. So now the categorized identity is the name you gave to it, just as you call this a mouse. The categorized identity of this object that you now see in your mind. So that is the nama and the rupa. Right? So Sankara basically constructs the perception, vijnana, of the object that was perceived, and it creates this mental image of the object. Now this concept of object is arising in your mind. You now have a mental image of the object. Now the object is in your mind. That's why that is the rupa. Not the object out there, but in your mind you become aware of that. And you now give it some meaning, some name, categorized in identification of the object, the nama.
So the sensation is the color, and the feeling is whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. So that is the first thing that we see. But when we open our eyes, what we see doesn't look like seeing colors. We are able to see objects. How do we see objects? It is simply an object is constructed by putting the colors together. When a person draws a picture on the wall or in a paper, that person is only putting colors on the picture. And it is when we look at those colors that we see it in the form of a face, or in the form of a tree, or maybe in the form of a table or bottle or whatever. We are seeing objects by putting the colors together. It is a construct. So every object that we see is a construct, a mental construct. So we put the colors together and form a construct. And we not only form a construct, we identify it. We are able to look at a thing and say, oh, this is a face. How do I know that it is a face? Because I have seen faces before. So that object that we see is put into a category of objects that I have seen. That is called categorization. It is by categorization that we are able to identify an object. I can look at an object and say, that is a chair, or that is a clock, or that is a door. All that is because I am categorizing what I look at. So this identification means we are also giving a name to that. So every object has been given a name to identify that. When we say clock, that is a name given to that object. When we say table, we are giving a name to that object. So there is an image and a name. Now this is what we call nama and rupa. Rupa means the image and nama means the name. So these are the words that we use. Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana. That Vijnana word is perception. But perception means identifying the object. That is the meaning of perception. We are not only seeing things, we are also able to identify and say, this is such and such. That is the meaning of perception.
So with that, we not only see anything, every experience we have with any object, it is always more than one sense organ involved. When we think we see something, we also want to touch it. And in touching it, it makes a sound. So we have touch, we have sound, right? And we have feeling, right? That's why children, when you give them something, the first thing they want to do is put it in their mouth. They want to taste it. They want to bite it. Not because they are hungry. A lot of people think, oh, because the child is hungry. No. It's because the child wants to use all the 6 senses to try to experience what that object is. Touching it, tasting it, right? Smelling it, and so on. So all these bring information into the mind. And these are the 5, altogether there are 6 senses, 5 of them come from our sense organs. And basically the 6th sense, the mano, puts it all together depending on the categorized memory of past experience. You call it something depending on your past experience. If you were to ask any school kid, 15-year-old, 12-year-old, or even a 10-year-old child, and show him this object, of course he's going to tell you it's a computer mouse. But if you took someone from the jungle who's never lived in the city before and brought him out, and then you show him this, he'll probably take it and want to bite it and see what it is. He wouldn't have a clue. And if you tell him it's a mouse, no, the mouse is the thing that runs around on the floor, on the ground. That's the mouse, you know. So you see, whether you know something, you give it a name, give it a label, it's dependent on your past experience. Right? So the mind, the mano puts it all together, and now we have these 6 senses now, right? And these 6 senses basically try to make a more complete picture of what was experienced, a more complete understanding of what you have just experienced. And with that more complete understanding, the mind begins to create a world out there using the 6 senses. So from sensing what was perceived through the sense organs to forming this objective experience using all the 6 senses.
What we have perceived is simply an object which comes in the form of an image and a name for it. An image and a name for it. Then, once that image has been made and the name, we say Vijnana Pacchaya Nama Rupam. Nama means the name, Rupa means that mental image. Then we talk about Nama Rupa Pacchaya Salayatana. Now, Salayatana means we are not only looking with our eyes, we are also hearing with our ears and smelling with our nose. We are also tasting with our tongue, and we are also touching with our body. This is why you give something to a small child, that child will want to put it in the mouth and touch in various ways, get all the impressions. So that is why all those things are put together to form an object. So it is not only the eye that we are using. When I look at this bottle here, I see it as a bottle, but I know that if I touch the bottle, this is how I'll feel it. Even if I have never touched it, I still know when I touch it, I'll feel it like this. That is because I am using my memory. I have touched bottles before. So you see, because we have using all the five senses, we put together all that to form an object.
Okay, at this point you have to be aware of what Bhante meant when he says to form an object. Here he's not just referring to the object you have just seen, but when he says an object, he meant to form the objective world. So now this is how it works. Mano Vijnana is the part that is called consciousness. The other Vijnana are not called consciousness, they are perceptions. So what you see with your eyes, or you hear with your ear, you touch with your skin, these are perceptions. This is what was perceived by the sense organ. And then these five sense organs come in and they become put together, built up into a big picture of this objective world out there. And that putting up together is done by Mano, the conception. It's also called cognition, conception. There are actually many names to it. Right? So let's take a look at these 6 types of vijnana. The first 5 are from the sense organs. The eye, ear, nose, tongue, and the body. These are perception. Perception from your sense organs. The word vijnana is often wrongly translated as consciousness. Only Mano Vijnana is consciousness. Mano Vijnana is what makes us conscious. We become conscious of a world out there through Mano Vijnana. Not because of our sense organs, but because all the sense organs put together created the meaning of a world out there. And that is what Mano Vijnana does. Conception of your sense perceptions, building it up. So it's not only conception, it is also consciousness, also cognition, and some call it recognition, and also categorization. So there are many words to describe that. Even intellect is another word to describe Mano Vijnana. Thinking, the intellect part is the thinking part. So this is really how we begin to construct a world out there, by bringing information from the five senses and building up a big story, a big picture of everything we experience. And then we begin to create the concept of an existence of a world out there. So in other words, the Paticca Samuppada basically described this process where the first thing that was created is the notion of a world out there. So through this process of phassa, which is the next thing that comes after putting all the six sensory experiences together. Right? So phassa is called the cognition, the complete cognition, right? And we become conscious of the objective experience. Here, objective experience means the objective world out there. And we begin to create the notion that there is a world out there. And this completes the cognitive process, the part that is called mano. So phassa basically is now the concept of an objective world. And this is what Bhante meant when he says forming an object. Here the word object is the big object, not just that little object you just saw, but the big object out there. And this is the objective world, forming the objective world. And this is when the experience of sensing begins to be broken up, dichotomized into two parts, the objective world out there and the subjective world in here. So first, the objective world out there, and this is because of this phassa, becoming conscious of the objective experience, phassa, which is often translated as contact, but it's not contact. It is really the cognition of the cognition that leads to the formation of the notion or the notion of an objective world out there.
So you see, because we have using all the five senses, we put together all that to form an object. That forming an object is what is called phassa. Salayatana pacca phasso. Phassa means the formation of an object. Today the word phassa is translated as contact. Phassa is not contact. Phassa is the formation of an object. The object is formed by making use of all the five senses, not just one sense. So that complete object is formed. That is phassa.
So all we did was just experiencing through the five senses. But what happens now is the mind begins to first create a world out there. So when light enters the eye and it stimulates the sense organ, and with attention, then the process of perception arises, then we have a mental image of what we have just seen out there. And with that, it's just an experience. But what the mind begins to do from that point onwards is to break that experience into two parts. First, it begins to create this notion of a world out there. By now projecting what you have just perceived through your sense organ and say, oh, there is a dog out there. So now it has broken that experience into two parts. What is out there is the objective world. And that's what Bhante meant when he says forming an object. Here the word object, he meant the big picture of this whole experience out there. And at the same time, what's in here, we begin to react to it. That subjective experience is a reaction. So we'll come to that subjective experience in a moment. Let's just stay focused on this objective experience out there. So whether it is something pleasant or unpleasant, whatever it is that we experience out there, there is a feeling about it. And it leads to this emotional reaction in here. So we begin to react, and that reaction is tanha.
Once the object is formed, we are going to make use of the feeling in the object. You may get a pleasant feeling in the object, or you may get an unpleasant feeling in the object. And the moment you get the feeling, you react to that object with a desire or hatred. You see, it's an emotional reaction to the object. That emotional reaction, the Buddha called tanha. Tanha is not craving. Today, Rice Davids use the word craving. But tanha is not craving. Tanha is the emotional reaction. A craving is wanting something. But here we not only wanting, if we dislike something, we don't want it. We want to get rid of it. So therefore it is not a craving, it is the emotional reaction.
So with this experience of having now created the notion of a world out there, we begin to experience whether this experience of the world out there is pleasant or unpleasant. That means now you're no longer talking about one specific object, you're now talking about that whole experience of that object relative or relevant to its situation. So for example, you're talking about eating durian. You're no longer talking about a piece of durian, but you're talking about the durian that you are experiencing relative to this experience of a durian party that is going on. So if it is a group of people enjoying durian, and you are one of the people enjoying the durian, that enjoyment experience is different from comparing to you sitting by the roadside and eating durian all alone. It's a different experience. So one experience may be pleasant, another may be unpleasant, or whatever it is. It is this pleasantness or unpleasantness that leads to your own reaction inside. So there is first the mind creating the world out there, and then the mind begins to react in here with this feeling of Vedana. So Vedana arises through the next process, the affective process of whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. So if we were to look at the flow chart of what is going on, activities in the environment stimulate your sense organs, and then the Panchakanda arises, and with the Panchakanda you now have the awareness of an object, Vijnana, right? You're now perceiving the object, and Therefore, you're able to see, hear, smell, taste, or touch objects. And with that, your mind begins to put all the different sensory experience together. And now you become aware of this object. Right? Let's say you've seen a dog. So now the mental image of the dog arises in the mind. And you know it's a dog because you are now processing it with past experience, memory of past experience. Right? So this process is papancha, and papancha is really the recognition. Right? Papancha actually is two parts, the cognition and the conception. So now you have recognized a dog. Now you begin to create a story behind it, the concept. Now there is a concept of a dog, an entity called a dog, right? So the word dog is just a name you call what you have perceived. And what you have perceived arises as a mental image, rupa. So therefore, you now call it a dog out there. You've now created this thing called out there. And that's a world out there. You've now created the world, having seen the dog. And then the whole experience is either pleasant or unpleasant. If you're a dog lover, more likely it's a pleasant experience. If you are a dog hater, then you will have an unpleasant experience. If you grew up with a lot of dogs in the house, it will be pleasant. But if you grew up fearful of dogs, like what I did when I grew up, I got bitten by my neighbor's dog so many times, I get scared of dogs. So then it will be unpleasant experience seeing a dog. I never liked dogs. So that's it, you see. So pleasant or unpleasant is not necessarily purely absolute. It is subjective to each person, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. Loud noise, loud sound, for example, loud music. To all of us, hard rock, metal music, which is hard and loud, we don't like it. Many of us don't like it. But you ask a teenager, he will love it. He loves that kind of music, right? Loud music, right? So different people will have different reaction to it. And that reaction is the reaction of the chitta, the emotional mind. And that reaction draws up your imagination, memory, expectation. And the mind begins to run off with all kinds of stories behind it. So there are three kinds of reaction. If it is something that is pleasant, then that is kama tanha. That reaction is reacting to pleasant feelings. And that is lobha. That reaction is called lobha, which is lust and greed for pleasures. If it is something unpleasant, the reaction is vibhava tanha, which is reacting to unpleasant experience or unpleasant feeling. And that reaction is called dosa, which is aversion or hatred towards displeasures. At the same time, when you experience something, you begin to think that, oh, I am experiencing it. So the notion, the delusion of the existence of a self arises, and you want that to continue. So that is bhava tanha. And that leads to the delusion of a self-centered existence, moha. Moha is often translated as ignorance. It's not. It's the delusion of a self-centered existence. Thinking that I exist. I like, I don't like. That I, me, or mine. That is your moha. So that is what happens with Vedana. That is the pleasant or unpleasant feelings leading to tanha, which is your reaction. There are three kinds of reaction, right? So emotional reaction, if it is something that is pleasant, you have kama tanha, and that is the reaction to pleasant feelings. The emotional reaction is lobha, which is lust or greed towards something that is pleasurable. Or if it is unpleasant, you have this vibhava tanha, which is to react to unpleasant feelings. You don't want it to exist anymore because it's unpleasant. And that reaction is dosa, which is aversion and hatred towards the displeasures. And then you begin to cling on to that experience. And that clinging on to experience is the personalizing of the experience. Personalizing this reaction as the subjective experience. I react. Never somebody else react. When you see a dog and you don't like the dog, what comes into your mind is, I don't like the dog. Or if you're a dog lover, I love the dog. The I arises. It's not what that person likes or doesn't like. It's in here, I. So this reaction is personalizing that reaction to what you have perceived. And that personalization is the subjective experience. You've now broken that experience of seeing a dog into two parts. The dog out there, and I like it or I don't like it in here. Right? That's really bhava tanha. And that is the delusion of a self-centered existence. With upadana, you now begin to cling on to the idea that now I am experiencing this. There is an I, me or mine arising from there. So this is the emotional reaction to feelings of the objective experience, leading to personalizing that reaction as mine. When you react internally, you never say this is his reaction, this is my reaction. I like this, I don't like this, That is what is most important to us. And personalizing this subjective experience create the notion of an I, me or mine. So the concept of self begins to arise, and it is now begin to come into existence. And this arising is bhava.
Now the moment the emotional reaction occurs, another interesting thing happens. You see, we first formed an object out there. Once the object is there, you begin to react to that object emotionally. Then there are two things, the object and the reaction. Earlier there was no reaction, but now there is a reaction. The moment the reaction comes up, the object is out there, the reaction is inside here. And what is inside? What do we do to what is inside? We say, this reaction is mine, is my reaction. The moment we say this reaction is mine, that is called personalizing the reaction. That is the meaning of the word upadana. Rice Davids used the word grasping or clinging. This is not grasping or clinging, it is calling that mine. That means personalizing. So the moment it is personalized, what happens? How can there be something mine if there is no I? The moment you say this is mine, you have created the I. I comes into being. That I coming into being is called bhava. The word bhava means coming into existence. The I have come into existence. Earlier there was no I here. There was only an object. The moment a desire or a hatred came, mind came, and with the mind came the I. You understood? So the I comes into being by personalizing.
The I comes into being by personalizing. This is the key to why we begin to think there is a self. When something happens, we begin to react. And that reaction we personalize as my reaction. And Bhante said, how can there be my reaction if there is no I to react? And that's where the notion of the I is created. He pointed out that Rice Davis called upadana as clinging, grasping. It's not clinging, it's not grasping, it's personalizing. The word upadana, we must understand the meaning from the Pali word. You see, these Westerners who translated, they never understood the Pali word. Upadana comes from two root words, upa and adana. Upa means to bring things inwards. Bringing something inwards is upa. Adana is the opposite of dana. What is dana? Dana is giving. Adana, the opposite of giving, is taking. Adana. So upa adana means to take it inwards. What is taking inwards? Personalizing. So that's why Bhante used the word personalizing. It's a beautiful word that explains exactly the meaning of upadana, to bring it inwards. Not grasping, not clinging, but to bring something inwards is to personalize it. So earlier there was no I, there was just the object that was experienced. So the mind created the objective world. But internally we begin to react to it, and then we begin to personalize the reaction, and that's how the I came into being. And that whole process is called bhava. So with pleasant and unpleasant feelings we react, and then we begin to personalize that reaction and say it is mine, this reaction is mine. And with that personalization of that experience, the mind begins to create the notion that there must be an I to react to it. That is the I that is reacting to it. That I is created. And that creation process is called bhava. And that is because of personalizing the reaction. So coming into existence, imaginary self in an imaginary world. What we have perceived out there through Phassa is this world out there. But now there is this imaginary self that is reacting to that world out there. So, and this whole process completes the process of the affective process, the citta. So with the concept of the I and the self arising, now we begin to want to look for something that we can refer to as the I. Because now the mind thinks there must be an I. What is the I then? The body becomes the I. Now the body is seen to be something that exists. And so we refer to the body as the self. That's how we begin to think that this body is me. And it is occupying space and time. Our mind is existential mind. Our mind always wants to think of things in terms of space and time. It is an existential mind. So therefore, when we think there is an I, the I must exist. How does the I exist? Oh, there is this body that occupies space and time. So the body must be the I.
So the moment the I has come into being, another question arises. What did you call the I? Where is the I? The I is only just a concept. But what are you referring to as I? There must be an object to call the I, to refer to the I. What is the object? The I has to exist. How can the I exist? What is the meaning of existence? Existence has to be understood. Existence means Now if you say this cup exists, what does it mean? The cup occupies space, it occupies time. To exist is to occupy space and time. So what is the I that is occupying space and time? The only I that can be occupying space and time is the body. So the body becomes the I. Body is the thing that is occupying space and time. When the body begins to occupy space and time, you can say the body is so many inches tall, so many fat, and all kinds of things you can talk about the body, you see. That is occupying space. The volume of the body, length, breadth and height. So, but occupying time means it has a past, a present and future. To occupy time is to have a past, a present and a future. Now the I is not only just I, but the I has been identified as the body. The body has become the I. So the body has become the self. The body has become the self.
So the body has become the self, and the notion that this body is the self, that is called Sakkaya Ditthi. That means the mind begins to think that this body is me. From the word Sakkaya Ditthi, Sak. Sak is to take ownership. You want to take over something, that is Sak. Kaya. Kaya is the body. Ditthi. Ditthi is the perspective or the point of view. So it's the point of view that I now own this body. And therefore this body is me. I own this body. Now that is so far the Buddhist explanation. Let's listen to a different kind of explanation. Let's listen to a modern scientist, a neuroscientist by the name of Antonio Damasio. Now this person is completely independent of the Buddhist studies. So far as I know, he has no encounter with Buddhism. So he is not speaking from a background of having read about the Buddha's explanation. He does a lot of research on emotions, mind, together with his wife. His wife is also a top-notch neuroscientist, operating the MRI machine, scanning the brain, interpreting the scans, and he is the one who then correlates this brain scans with how we behave. So between the two of them, they are experts in the notion of emotions. So let's listen to Antonio Damasio explaining how we made this body I, me, or mine.
What is consciousness? What is a conscious mind? Well, first of all, it is a mind which is a flow of mental images. And of course, consider images that can be sensory patterns, visual, such as you're having right now in relation to the stage and me, or auditory images as you're having now in relation to my words. That flow of mental images is mind. But there is something else that we're all experiencing in this room. We are not passive exhibitors of visual or auditory or tactile images. We have selves. We have a me that is automatically present in our minds right now. We own our minds, and we have a sense that it's every one of us that is experiencing this, not the person who is sitting next to you. So in order to have a conscious mind, you have a self within the conscious mind. So a conscious mind is a mind with a self in it. The self introduces a subjective perspective in the mind, and we are only fully conscious when self comes to mind. So what we need to know to even address this mystery is, number one, how minds are put together in the brain, and number two, how selves are constructed. But what about the self? The self is really the elusive problem. And for a long time, people did not even want to touch it, and because they say, how can you have this sort of reference point, this stability that is required to maintain the continuity of selves day after day? And I thought about a solution to this problem is the following. We generate brain maps of the body's interior and use them as the reference for all other maps. So let me tell you just a little bit about how I came to this. I came to this because if you're going to have a reference that we know as self, the me, the I in our own processing, we need to have something that is stable, something that does not deviate much from day to day. Well, it so happens that we have a singular body. We have one body, not two, not three, and so that is a beginning. There is just one reference point, which is the body.
So basically, we're looking for something stable, something that gives us a sense of stability. So what he has said here is very simple. He says consciousness. Now, scientists like to define consciousness as more than becoming aware of objects. It is actually the awareness of a self in the world. So if you want to have a simple explanation or a simple definition of how scientists define consciousness, it is the awareness of a self in the world. So basically, consciousness is the mind, which is a continuous flow of mental images, and a conscious mind is a mind with a self in it. He didn't say that the self exists. He just says a mind with a self in it. In other words, the mind created the notion of a self, right? So basically, the self introduces the subjective perspective in the mind. The subjective experience is the self. And we are only fully conscious. Now, back to the same definition of scientists' definition of consciousness. We are only fully conscious when self comes to mind, meaning we become aware there is a self. Now, this awareness is created. We have to be aware of that, right? And he pointed out, we need to know two things. First, how minds are put together. And that is, we have been talking about that already, so we're not going to touch on that. But the second one is the interesting one. How selves are constructed. How is this notion of a self become constructed? And he pointed out that what we do is we generate brain maps of the body's interior. And we use them as a reference point for all maps of the world. That means we begin to be aware of our experiences, our subjective experience. And we begin to build this idea that we have hands, we have eyes, we have ears, so we have our sense organs. Being aware of having sense organs, we begin to create this brain map of our body's interior. What is the body's interior? Your sense organs. So we are using that as a reference point for the world. But it's the last part that is most interesting. It says, then the body becomes the reference point for the self. The sense organs create a reference point for the world, but the body creates the reference point for the self, right? And this is really what's going on there. It says, how minds are put together, we've been talking about that, but how selves are constructed. Now, there's the clue there. He says, how selves are constructed. A self is constructed. It doesn't exist. It's constructed by the mind. And how the mind uses our sense organs and create a brain map of the sense organs relative to the world out there. So basically this is the Panchakanda going on, the 5 constituents of the process of perception through our sense organs, that we become aware of the world out there. And in other words, the sense organs give us a reference point to the world out there. The body gives us a reference point to this self in here, right? So we begin to personalize this experience as the subjective experience. And this creates the notion that there is a self in the world, right? So how self exists in the world. Now back to what Bhante has been explaining as upadana. I created this image from many discussions with Bhante. Basically, it's personalization of the body. This process is called Sakkaya Ditthi. And basically, it begins by personalizing the reaction to objects. So in other words, every time we see, hear, smell, taste and touch something, there is a reaction, there is a tanha. And then we begin to personalize that tanha, that experience of a subjective self. We begin to call this experience, oh, I am reacting, my reactions. So now having the notion that I am reacting, or there is I, me or mine reacting, we need something stable, some stability, point of reference, something that is stable that to call the self. And very conveniently, there is a body that we can call the self. So the concept of the body is the self arises. And therefore we begin to think that this body is me and it exists in this objective world. So the first part is personalizing the reaction to what we have experienced. And by personalizing, we call this a reaction mind. And the second part is seeking stability. And therefore there must be an I behind the mind. The I must exist. And now we found the body, and the body conveniently becomes the I. So this is how we begin to think that this body is me. Right? I am this body. Now let's see what Bhante has to say. Existence means that there is a past, a present, and a future. With the body as the self that exists, now in the mind, the body exists. That birth is the past of the body, aging is the present of the body, and death is the future of the body. With birth, aging, and death comes the whole mass of suffering.
So the body has become the self. The body has become the self. So once the body has become the self, it has a past, present and future. What is the past of the body? Birth. Birth is the past of the body. What is the future of the body? Death. Death is the future of the body. And in between birth and death is what we call aging. So you see, now you are not only having a body, you are not only having a self, you are also having birth, old age and death. With the coming of birth, old age and death, what happens? Grief, lamentation, pain, sorrow and despair. By creating a self, you have created suffering.
Now, we were to look at it from the flowchart perspective. Now, with the reaction of the chitta, emotionally we react to something, and then there is lobha, dosa, moha arising. Now, we begin to think that, oh, I want to do something about this. I'm angry about something I don't like, or I lust for something that I like. So there is lust and greed, aversion and hatred, and there is the delusion of the self-centered existence. There is now this intention of wanting to do something, emotional urge. That is volition, chetana. Chetana is the intention or the volition. Then we take action, and that is karma. Unskillful action, and with that action comes the consequence that we created, vipaka. And vipaka comes back to haunt us, either immediately, later on in life, at the end of our life, or in our next life, and so on. So this is really the whole cycle of birth, suffering, and aging, right? Birth, aging, suffering, and death, right? And birth and existence. Now, a lot of people think that I exist because I am born. Right? Why do you exist? Because I am born. We think we exist because we are born. But actually, the Buddha said the other way around, and let Bhante explain that. We are born because our mind keeps thinking of existence. Our mind is locked on to the notion of an existential philosophy, existential mindset. And with that lock on to existential mindset, we get reborn over and over again.
We have been born. We are born, we grow old, fall sick and die. And what is the cause of birth? Why are we born? Now the important thing is that we think we have come into existence, and how did we come into existence? Because we were born. But here the Buddha is pointing out we didn't come into existence because we were born. This is an interesting thing. We were born because we have come into existence. Normally people think that we have come into existence because we were born. Here the Buddha points out that we were born because we have come into existence. Bhavapacha jati. Not jati-pacha bhava. This is the interesting thing. Then the problem comes up, how did we come into existence? This is the interesting thing. How did we come into existence? There the Buddha points out Upadana pacchaya bhava. Upadana means personalizing. Upadana means to take inside. By personalizing, we have come into existence.
By personalizing, we have come into existence. So the key to remember here is, it is the notion of existence, the dream of existence leads to rebirth. Bhava, Pachaya, Jati. Bhava is the notion of existence, the dream of existence. Pachaya. Pachaya means the conditions that lead to. Jati. Jati is birth. The dream of existence is the condition that leads to rebirth, birth and rebirth. And when the Buddha woke up from that, from there the Buddha saw the whole process of Paticca Samuppada unfolding. So this whole process, then Buddha becomes aware that this is really how we came into existence. And then he made this realization. And this realization is called Anuttara Samma Sambuddha. There are two parts. The first part is through innumerable lives in this vortex of rebirth, did I seek the creator of this grief-ridden world. So never did I find this creator unknown. It is painful to be reborn again and again. So this was the first part. He realized that he had been looking for the creator of the world. Now he gave the answer. O creator, I have seen you. You will never create again. Your structure is dismantled, foundation is destroyed. The mind has stopped creating. The emotional urge has ceased. So in other words, it's the mind that created the world out there. The mind that personalized this experience and reaction in here. And that's the notion of existence, the dream of existence that the mind created. There is no creator out there. The creator is the mind creating this world, the notion of the world, the notion of existence. That's why we get reborn over and over again. The way to reverse that is not to cling on, not to personalize the upadana part. And upadana arises because of tanha, our emotional reaction. And Bhante has always taught us to tame our emotion. Taming our emotion will stop us from reacting. Stopping us from reacting will then no longer give rise to the conditions where we personalize the reactions, and therefore we will then shift. We have this paradigm shift. Our mindset will shift from existential thinking to experiential thinking. That every time we experience something, don't react to it. Just realize it is just an experience. And you can download all the slides at this tiny.cc/review07. You can download all the slides here.